Maurice "Rocket" Richard wasn't just a hockey player. He was a force of nature who changed the game and reshaped a nation. Born in 1921 in Montreal, Richard rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most electrifying athletes of his generation. While his statistical achievements are impressive, he was the first player to score 50 goals in a season and 500 in a career. These numbers barely scratch the surface of his true significance. Richard's impact extends far beyond the rinks and arenas where he played. He emerged as a symbol of pride, defiance, and possibility for French Canadians at a time when they struggled for respect and recognition. His presence on the ice represented more than athletic excellence. It embodied the aspirations of an entire cultural group searching for its place in a changing world. In many ways, Richard's story is Canada's story, complex, sometimes uncomfortable, but ultimately transformative. He became both a catalyst and a reflection of those changes. From the infamous Richard Riot of 1955, which many historians view as a precursor to Quebec's Quiet Revolution, to his enduring legacy in Canadian arts and culture, the Rocket's influence can be felt in surprising and meaningful ways decades after his final game. This is not just a story of a man who could skate fast and shoot hard. It's the story of how a single individual, through talent and circumstance, can transcend sport to become a cultural icon whose impact resonates through generations. Maurice Richard didn't just change hockey. He changed how people saw themselves and how a nation understood itself. Maurice Richard emerged as a heroic figure during a pivotal time in Quebec's history. In the 1940s and 1950s, French Canadians faced significant economic and social disadvantages. Most businesses were owned by English-speaking Canadians or Americans, and French-speaking citizens often found themselves limited to lower-paying jobs with little opportunity for advancement. Against this backdrop, Richard's rise to prominence took on special meaning. What made Richard unique wasn't just his talent, but his unapologetic French-Canadian identity. At a time when French players were expected to learn English and conform to the Anglo establishment, Richard remained proudly and defiantly himself. He rarely gave interviews in English, preferring to communicate in his native French, even when this created tension with English-speaking media and fans. The Richard Riot of March 17, 1955 stands as perhaps the most powerful illustration of his cultural significance. When NHL President Clarence Campbell suspended Richard for the remainder of the season and playoffs after an on-ice altercation, the decision was viewed by many French Canadians as yet another example of discrimination. What began as a protest at the Montreal Forum quickly escalated into a full-scale riot that spilled onto the streets, causing extensive damage throughout downtown Montreal. This wasn't simply fans upset about a sports penalty. It was the eruption of long-simmering frustrations about inequality and disrespect. Richard had become so deeply intertwined with French-Canadian identity that an attack on him felt like an attack on an entire people. As historian Benoit Malankin noted, Richard gave French Canadians someone to be proud of, someone who could beat the English at their own game. Even Richard's nickname, the Rocket, took on symbolic importance. It represented speed, power, and unstoppable force, qualities that resonated with a population increasingly determined to claim their rightful place in society. When Richard skated past English-Canadian defensemen and scored, it felt like a cultural victory as much as an athletic one. His popularity transcended normal fan admiration. In the small towns and rural villages of Quebec, Richard's picture hung in homes alongside religious icons, a sign of his almost spiritual significance to the people who saw in him their own struggles and aspirations. Maurice Richard's career perfectly aligned with a period of profound transformation in Quebec society. The years following World War II saw the beginning of what would later be called the Quiet Revolution, a time when Quebec began to modernize, secularize, and assert its cultural and political identity with new confidence. Though Richard himself rarely made explicit political statements, his presence and success became intertwined with these larger social movements. Historian Susan Mann describes Richard as the precursor to the Quiet Revolution, noting how his defiance of authority resonated with a generation increasingly unwilling to accept second-class status. Richard embodied a new type of French-Canadian figure, confident, successful, and unwilling to be diminished. His refusal to back down from confrontations with English-Canadian players and NHL leadership provided a powerful model for self-assertion that extended beyond sports. The impact of the Richard Riot cannot be overstated in this context. Many social historians view it as a crucial turning point that helped galvanize Quebec nationalism. Jean Beliveau, Richard's teammate, later reflected that the riot was about more than hockey, it was about respect. In the years that followed, Quebec would experience dramatic political changes, including the rise of separatist movements and calls for greater autonomy. Richard helped change how French Canadians viewed themselves. Before him, success in the English-dominated world of professional sports seemed limited. After Richard, a generation of French Canadian players emerged who carried themselves with new confidence. As journalist Red Fisher once wrote, Richard showed an entire people that they could compete and win on the biggest stages. This shift in self self-perception went far beyond hockey. Throughout Quebec society, there was a growing sense that French language and culture deserved preservation and celebration. Richard became a living example that one could achieve greatness without sacrificing identity. When he was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1961, with a traditional waiting period, waived in recognition of his extraordinary impact, it was celebrated throughout Quebec as a validation not just of one man, but an entire cultural perspective. Though Richard himself maintained a certain distance from explicit political movements, he understood his symbolic importance. When asked later in life about his impact, he humbly acknowledged, "Perhaps I gave people some pride. If so, that is good." This understatement belies just how thoroughly his presence helped reshape Quebec's cultural landscape and accelerate changes that would define Canadian history for decades to come. Maurice Richard's influence continues to resonate decades after his final game and even following his death in 2000. His impact on hockey itself is immeasurable. The NHL created the Maurice Richard Trophy in 1999 to honor the league's top goal scorer each season, ensuring that future generations of players and fans would know his name. When the Montreal Canadiens closed their historic Montreal Forum in 1996, it was Richard who received the longest and most emotional ovation, a testament to his enduring place in the hearts of fans. Beyond official recognition, Richard's legacy lives on in the careers of countless French-Canadian players who followed him. From Guy Lafleur to Mario Lemieux to Vincent Lecavalier, generations of Quebec-born stars have cited Richard as their inspiration. The path he blazed made it possible for French-speaking players to maintain their cultural identity while achieving success at hockey's highest level. Today, approximately 20% of NHL players come from Quebec, a statistic that would have seemed impossible before Richard's break. Richard's impact extends well beyond the world of sport. His life story has inspired an impressive body of creative work. The 2005 film The Rocket brought his story to cinema screens. Novelist Rock Carrier's iconic children's story, The Hockey Sweater, featuring a young boy's devotion to Richard, has become required reading in Canadian schools. Musicians, poets, and playwrights have all found inspiration in his journey, creating works that explore themes of identity, resistance, and cultural pride. Public spaces throughout Canada bear his name. The Maurice Richard Arena in Montreal serves as a training center for future athletes. Streets, parks, and schools named after him ensure that his legacy remains visible in everyday life. When the Canadian government released a commemorative stamp in his honor, it sold out faster than any previous issue, purchased not just by stamp collectors but by ordinary citizens wanting a memento of their hero. Perhaps most significantly, Richard's legacy endures in how Canadians understand their own national story. His life bridged old Quebec and new rural traditions and urban modernity, ethnic divisions, and cultural reconciliation. Historians now regularly include Richard in discussions of Canada's evolution as a multicultural society. His story provides a unique lens through which to examine questions of language, identity, and belonging that continue to define Canadian experience. The true measure of Richard's impact lies in how thoroughly he transcended the boundaries of sport. He began as a hockey player but became something far more, a cultural touchstone whose significance continues to be reinterpreted by new generations seeking to understand their past and shape their future. Few athletes in any sport have left such a profound and lasting mark on their society. Maurice Richard's journey from the hockey rinks of Montreal to becoming a pivotal figure in Canadian history demonstrates how athletic excellence can become a vehicle for profound social change. While his 544 goals and 8 Stanley Cup championships speak to his brilliance as a player, it is his role as a cultural icon that truly defines his legacy. Richard didn't set out to become a symbol of French-Canadian pride or a catalyst for social transformation. He simply played the game he loved with unmatched passion and intensity. Yet in doing so, he became something much larger than himself. The story of the Rocket reminds us that sports figures can serve as powerful mirrors reflecting the tensions, aspirations, and evolution of their societies. Richard emerged at precisely the moment when Quebec was beginning to question old hierarchies and imagine new possibilities for itself. His success became intertwined with these broader currents of change, amplifying and accelerating them in ways that continue to shape Canadian society today. Richard's place in history extends far beyond the record books and trophy cases. He belongs alongside other transformative cultural figures who help nations understand themselves in new ways. Just as Jackie Robinson forever changed American sports and society, Richard altered Canada's perception of itself. He challenged assumptions about who could succeed and on what terms. He demonstrated that cultural authenticity need not be sacrificed for achievement. As Canada continues to navigate questions of identity, language, and belonging, Richard's legacy offers valuable perspective. His story embodies both the tensions that can divide a society and the shared passions that can unite it. In the final analysis, Maurice Rocket Richard wasn't just a hockey player who transcended his sport. He was a singular individual whose life and career helped write a crucial chapter in the ongoing story of a nation.